Good evening, everyone, and welcome to our 23rd annual women's event. Tonight looks a little different. We aren't gathered in person in a beautiful ballroom somewhere in Manhattan, but it doesn't matter. We're here together virtually to celebrate and create space for lesbian, bisexual, transgender, and queer women. Tonight, we are proud to honor the members of the WNBA for their individual and collective activism demonstrated by players on and off the court. We're following that with an important panel discussion on the impact of the 2020 election season and the future for LGBTQ women. Before we dive in, I wanted to take just a moment and share what's been happening at the center over the last 8 months. From our beginning during the AIDS epidemic to the COVID pandemic we are currently living through, the center has been committed to serving our community and always being a beacon of light, especially during difficult times. Our history shows us that we must continually evolve our services to meet the most urgent needs of the community, and that's been especially true during COVID. In March, we converted all of our in-person programs to remote delivery. So whether by video, phone call, or even fielding inquiries on our website through a new chat function, we're making sure no one feels alone. Our community's needs during these challenging times are even more complex, and I am so proud of the way our staff has been committed to partnering with and supporting our entire community. Compared to when we were in the building, we've seen a 40% increase in demand for services. In fact, since the building closed on March 13th, we have delivered more than 18,000 units of virtual services. This includes everything we provide, from our youth program to healthcare navigation and enrollment, to mental health counseling, to remote HIV testing and counseling, to the substance use treatment program for both youth and adults. On the other hand, our Rise Out advocacy team has also been having great success this year, contacting over 50,000 residents in 10 hard-to-count counties, with a majority of historically underrepresented individuals in New York State. And we encouraged them and helped them fill out the census. And for the primary and general elections, we reached more than 80,000 New Yorkers who live in areas that are generally undercounted and have historically low voter turnout, giving them polling site information and tips to make sure their votes are counted. Our arts and cultural programming continues online, connecting LGBTQ communities here and even across the globe with engaging and thought-provoking conversations and experiences. As much as folks rely on us, we also rely on our community and allies like you all to continue to show up. And show up you do. I want to express our gratitude to those who made tonight possible. First, thank you to our Leadership Society members. Your support continues to provide us the ability to host gatherings like this and to provide critical support to our entire LGBTQ+ community, especially during this tough year. A big thanks as well to our women's event corporate sponsors, especially our Platinum sponsor, MasterCard, our Palladium sponsors, Bridgewater, Goldman Sachs, and Warner Media. Your dedication to the center and our programs is deeply appreciated now more than ever. And if you are sitting on the call saying, how can I continue to support the center? Don't worry, you can. Please visit gaycenter.org/donate to make a gift tonight. This year, we are thrilled to recognize the players of the WNBA for their incredible activism on and off the court and their commitment to supporting LGBTQ women. While many professional sports players have individually made commitments to equality and justice for marginalized groups, especially Black, BIPOC, and queer individuals, these players have been without parallel, using their collective voice to advocate and inspire. Their activism isn't new. They've been using their platforms to shed light on injustice for years, well before many other celebrities and athletes felt comfortable doing so. So let's now welcome the Executive Committee of the WNBA Players Association to accept this award.
Thank you, Glenda, for that introduction. We are honored for this recognition from New York City's LGBT Community Center. And thank you all for tuning in tonight to celebrate with us, from New York City to California to Turkey.
As players in the WNBA, we have often stood up for people at the margins, for women, LGBTQ+ folks, for Black and Brown people, for ourselves, and so many others. Though we don't always receive the credit, women are often leading the way, and I know you all know that. This year was no different for us as we used our collective power to bring attention to the gross injustices in our country.
Like so many of you, we have had to face challenges on and off the court. But what makes a team or community successful is the strength in our unity. Adversity offers an opportunity to band together, and that's exactly what we did this summer. It wasn't easy, but our common goal of playing for Breonna Taylor and so many others fueled us.
This year, we have all faced unbelievable challenges. From the COVID-19 pandemic, the fight for Black lives, voter suppression, and so much more. We continue to have the opportunity to stand united in the face of injustice, all of us, to fight even harder for the most vulnerable among us, for the trans community, Indigenous folks, Latinx people, and folks across the spectrum of abilities. Thank you for seeing us and supporting our work. We will continue to say her name. We will continue to shout from the court that Black Lives Matter, and we will continue to make sure we fight for all of you.
And of course, we want to thank all of you for being such great fans. The game was not the same without your presence. We cannot wait to hear your cheers and even your boos if one of us is playing against your favorite team. On behalf of the Women's National Basketball Players Association, thank you. We are deeply honored.
Thank you.
Thank you.
What powerful and important words from the members of the WNBA Players Association. I only wish we were all in person. Thank you again for all of the work that you do on and off the court. I hope people are celebrating all over right now. I'd like to turn it over to our incredible Chief Advocacy Officer, friend and colleague, Shiju Ade-Kadre, to introduce our amazing panel for this evening.
Thanks, Glenda. Hi, everyone. My name is Shiju Ade-Kadre, and as Glenda mentioned, I'm the Chief Advocacy Officer of the LGBT Center. I'm so excited to be here, if only in virtual love, for the conversation we're about to have. And before we begin, I want to remind everybody that this is actually live. This is in real life. So if you have questions as we get through our panel, please submit them through YouTube. We will do our very best to try and answer them. And looking forward to the conversation we're about to have. Before I introduce the individual panelists, though, I feel like it's important in queer spaces that we talk about astrology. So I want to let you know that I'm an Aries. And I'm going to be talking a little bit about the astrological signs, our sun signs in particular, of our panelists this evening. So without further ado, first up, I am so excited to introduce Alicia Garza. She is the co-creator of the Black Lives Matter and the Black Lives Matter Global Network. You might have heard of this, small global movement that now has 40 chapters in 4 countries. Alicia founded Black Futures Lab to make Black communities powerful in politics. She also serves as the Strategy and Partnerships Director for the National Domestic Workers Alliance. Additionally, Alicia is the co-founder of Supermajority, a new home for women's activism. And most importantly for our audience, she is a Capricorn. I look forward to seeing you soon, Alicia. Hi. Next up, I'm looking forward to welcoming Cecilia Gentili. She is my favorite and most fierce Aquarian friend and is the principal consultant and founder of the transgender equity consulting firm. Originally from Argentina, Cecilia came to the US for a safer life as a transgender woman and lived here undocumented for 10 years. During this time, she gained her living through sex work, which came with drug use. After multiple arrests and an immigration detention, she accessed recovery services, fought, and won her asylum. Her experience surviving this time in her life impassions her desire to ensure that all living people living on the margins are provided with access to the dignity and respect they deserve. Hi, Cecilia. Next up, I'm very happy to introduce Urvashi Vad, who is an attorney and an organizer and has been engaged in LGBTQ civil rights and social justice work for over 4 decades. Now, I could spend the next 30 minutes reading her resume, but I'm just going to give you a few highlights of her work, which include that she is currently the president of the VAD Group, a social innovation firm focused on equity, justice, and inclusion. She has served as a senior fellow at the CUNY Graduate Center, executive director at the Arcus Foundation, executive director and later Policy Institute director of the National Gay and Lesbian Task Force, as well as serving as a staff attorney at the ACLU National Prison Project. Besides my wife, Urvashi is a Libra after my own activist heart. Hi.
Hi.
And last but certainly not least, I am thrilled to welcome a deity to the space, Goddess Lala Holston Zanel, who is a community organizer and human rights activist who uses her lived experiences to speak truth to power. She leads the ACLU's advocacy and organizing work to support and empower transgender and non-binary people. As the chair of the policy and working group for the Communities United for Police Reform, Lala was part of passing Intro 541, which addresses unconstitutional searches by the NYPD. Recently, Lala created the first trans discrimination survey in New York City to collect data on trans people's experiences in employment. And besides being a whole mood all the time, Lala is also a Cancer. You want this queen on your team. Hello, everybody. It is beautiful to see you all. I want to just acknowledge this moment that this is a diverse panel of racial, ethnic, sexual orientation, gender identity women, but also of BIPOC women. And so I'm giving you all a virtual high five, a little like shoulder rub, because that is a beautiful space to be in with all of you tonight. So we're going to dive right in. And, you know, it's 2020. We might have had an election recently. We might actually even have a legal winner. We also have somebody who maybe doesn't want to acknowledge that, right? So we have an incoming administration, without a doubt. And we, like many times, we've heard a lot of campaign promises from the Biden-Harris administration that could directly impact LGBTQ folks. It's also important to acknowledge that those promises, in some ways, are framed against trying to undo the harms of the Trump administration. So if we are finally to January 21st, the inauguration has happened, people are in their seats, and you have a fantastically magical wand, a superpower. What's one of the first actions you want to see the Biden-Harris administration take as it pertains to our community? I can call on folks, but I encourage you just to, this actually isn't the space where normally we have to be polite and be like, well, I'll let them go. It's okay to jump in, sis. I see you all.
Well, I'll start. I would love them to repeal all Trump executive orders. All of them. Within the first few weeks, replace the anti-trans, anti-LGBT, racist, sexist crap that they have put out for the last 4 years and replace them with proactive executive orders that advance LGBTQ people's lives and freedom, that advance racial justice, gender equity, and create economic opportunity for everybody. That's it.
I can go.
Yeah.
So co-sign to that. And there's a couple of first actions that I think this administration should take. Number one, I think after 9 months of a global pandemic that has been ravaging our communities, I think that we need immediate relief and recovery. And I think that needs to look like making sure that first and foremost, the folks who have been left out and left behind, even from accessing the little tiny bit of stimulus that they tried to give before everything shut down, should really be deeply invested in. I agree 100% with Urvashi that what has to happen here is that all of the harmful executive orders that this president enacted over 4 years of terror need to be repealed. And I think we need to also reestablish some of the floors that were decimated under this administration, including the Civil Rights Division of the Department of Justice, which, was the last vestige left in the federal government, really, of overseeing just basic equality. And then lastly, what I would like to see is a setting of the tone at the federal level for what states and cities across the nation should be doing in terms of reallocating funding from a punishment economy to an economy that's built on care. What I know is that we don't have the basic infrastructure that we need to live, much less to live well. And I think the federal government can actually make the federal budget a moral document that identifies that there are new priorities in this new phase of this country. And those priorities, again, should be our communities.
Mm-hmm. That was such a good move, Urvashi, to go before Alicia Garza. What do you say? What can I add to this? So to all of that, and I think it's, this may not sound like something that is LGBTQ specific, but I think like this country owes a state ship to Puerto Rico and owes state ship to Washington, D.C. And I think if we add those two important locations as states, we will have some kind of change that would continue rolling through the years, and it would create some kind of stability. Me as a trans woman, as an immigrant, and as someone who lived undocumented in this country, I feel like I wasn't in a good space with the Obama administration. And then, the Trump administration came, and now the Biden administration comes, and then I don't know what to do. I think like something like statehood to Puerto Rico and DC would create a system that would kind of like level this like roller coaster of going from Republicans to Democrats to Republicans to Democrats. And that's what we need, It's like you can be changing your whole life every 4 years, when the Trump administration came into place, after crying for weeks, I realized that I was fucked. And that's not a good feeling, right? And we need to create some stability, create a way of living that is comprehensive of all of us. So another thing that I could say that is important for me in immediate immigration reform that is comprehensive of everybody in this country without a legal status, and in immediate justice system reform to undo the criminalization of poverty. And somebody put in the chat, repeal system FOSTA, and that would be one of the things that would go right there as one of the things that I want.
Love that. Thank you, Cecilia.
Wow, yeah, I don't want to go behind Cecilia.
No question.
Right. No, I echo everything that everyone has spoke on, but I think for me, as a Black trans woman, I would like to really see, when you talk about unification and you keep using transgender and all these words, all these initiatives that you want to do. And yes, you got a trans person on your incoming administration, but it's good. And that's amazing. That's dope. but I think they need to start doing that from folks that look like me, from folks that are in the margins, folks who are Black and brown, folks who are undocumented, folks who are disabled, folks who are impacted by the prison industrial complex, folks, people who are impacted by homelessness and poverty, people who are impacted by violence and just generations of just being stuck in the system. Like if you're a trans person from Chicago or Wisconsin or Baltimore. And so I just want to see really unification of race and unification of Black trans women and trans bodies in this collection of unification. And that hoping that Vice President Harris will be the champion of merging this divide of womanhood and this violence that has happened where men clearly have created this social construct called gender to separate women and men, and then you add the turfs in it. And so it causes this divide where we have forgotten about the people. And so, yes, I want you to repeal every hard executive order, but we know executive orders will just be overturned. And so, that also includes sex work. It's sex work now, decriminalizing sex work now, and also reparations for folks who are African descendants who were enslaved to this country. It is time to really dismantle and open that door as well.
So let me be clear. I want to live in this world, okay? Like, I want this world on January 21st. My magical wand is to give you all the power to do these things, right? But one of the things that's really clear in hearing these ideas, and we hear this kind of in the media, but we know it from lived experience, when women lead, when BIPOC women lead, we all win, right? Because, you might hear our oppression is linked and how do you center different identities? But the reality is when you have those folks who have been intentionally and repeatedly disconnected from the hallways of power and privilege, and when you say, let's all work together to rebuild this and transform this landscape, this is what we get. And what you're sort of bringing me to is that in 2018, that was dubbed like the year of the woman when it comes to running for different levels of office. But in 2020, we saw unprecedented numbers of women at every level, local, state, and federal, running for office. Over 100 women of color ran for different congressional seats in the country. We know thousands more ran at the local and state level. We have seen over 570 queer folks run for office, and almost half of them run and win those races. So we're seeing like a different sort of representation. The ideal is that we're seeing ourselves in the seats of power. And I'm curious about, what do you all think accounts for this transition in leadership? We've always known we can lead, but it is different when you can get folks to the ballot, on the ballot, folks to the ballot, to the polls, and then actually win. What do you all see? Is it a difference in outreach to folks? Is it a difference of the politic, the innovation, the platforms? What do you all think accounts for the significant shifts in seeing women, women of color, and queer folks running and succeeding at the ballot?
I think, go ahead.
You go, my sister. You go, my sister.
I just think that it's important to understand that the rest of the world is catching up. Black women has always carried the Democratic Party. And so we need to acknowledge that. And that queer folks, Black and brown queer folks, have been carrying the LGBT movement in all the margins before this. And so the world is catching up. And we have been doing this. And just a quick history lesson, because some people give so many credit to Abrams, Keisha Bottoms, and I appreciate my sisters, but also
Come on.
history gets erased if we don't acknowledge so many queer people like Shia Diamond, Angelica Ross, Blossom, Bambi Sasato, and Ashley Preston using their platform, pushing Mayor Pete, pushing Elizabeth Warren, pushing Biden, like all the way, like having all these, they had like mini balls to get the ballroom culture involved in voting. And so like, we have always been in the forefront of any organizing. I just would like to see the folks that look like us and that the Bidens and the folks in power start to acknowledge that our contributions, because erasure is real. And it keeps the narrative that we just popping up and pushing gender on you when we have been a part of this movement forever. From Martin Luther King on down. Like there's so many historic components. If you're a true historian, that would say that we have been there for the longest.
Absolutely. And if I can, something that you highlighted, Lala, in there is this concept that I love of Sankofa. The Sankofa is an Adinkra symbol from Ghana, which is in West Africa. And it literally is two swans that are crossed over. And it's the idea is that you have to know where you have come from to know where you are going. So I appreciate that herstory lesson. I think it is so critical to continue to say it and repeat it until it's written down and accepted as fact, because it is. Alicia, Cecilia, or Rishi, curious to hear your thoughts. Yeah.
As a non-American person, next year I'll be a citizen. So, but as a non-American person here, I would say America about time. You know, I grew up in Argentina with a figure like Evita, who didn't get to be the president, but it was, shaped the social services and the social system of a country in South America, with Isabel Perón, which, I have many issues with the presidency, but, she was a woman president in the 70s, we had Christina Kirchner, who also with her presidency changed like the social landscape of all Argentina. And for that, some of my sisters who suffer so much, through the dictatorship are receiving a reparations pension. Trans woman receiving a reparations pension in South America. Check that out. I say I say about time, we owe these to ourselves, right? And I think it's also part of a culture of reactiveness of the United States, right? Sometimes, we don't do things, but we react to things, right? So because of this president was so crappy towards women and LGBT people, then we react. So I think we have to start thinking in a non-reactive way, but in a proactive way in the future, because when we do that, we win. And that's why we have so many much women in power. And that's what's up.
Yeah.
Well, one thing I want to add to this, and y'all are just brilliant. Number one, Lala, thank you for lifting up the voices of all of the people who are unsung, who have been doing this work on and off camera. and Cecilia, you struck me in my core when you said, how powerful it is to see a woman as a leader in the 70s when women were still expected to be, secretaries and side pieces to men. And with all of that being true, I think the other dynamic in this moment that we have to all be mindful of is that representation is not enough. Mm-hmm. And we've fought so long and so hard to be at the table, and we deserve to be at the table. But now we have a danger of getting our people to the table, but they don't take our values with them. And so that's a thing that I know we experience very much under, the presidency of Barack Obama. I was in the streets dancing when he got elected, but then it became really complicated to try to hold him accountable because we were so happy to have a Black man leading this country for the first time in history that it was hard to also press him on making sure that he was advancing our values. And of course, then this year, one of the things we saw was with the brutal murder of Breonna Taylor, we all watched the television as the district attorney in that case gave a speech that I said was really reminiscent of the way that Bull Connor used to talk in the 1950s. But it wasn't a white man giving that speech, it was a Black man. And so, now that we are doing all of this organizing, which is so important, we also have to make sure that we're matching symbol with substance. Because I know I don't want to see trans people leading who aren't making sure that our communities are being advanced. I don't want to see Black people leading if you're not trying to make sure that all of us are getting a leg up here. So that's the new kind of front of our movement right now. And I think it's something that we all have to pay really close attention to.
Absolutely.
I think these are just brilliant comments and great analysis. And I think that Lala, you named it so beautifully. There is such a long story of women of color and Black women's central leadership in all of our movements. And when you were speaking, I was thinking of like 1977 and the Combahee River Feminist Collective statement, which was a Black feminist collective with a lot of queer women in it. And it is the kind of blueprint for the politics of all of our social movements right now. Whether you know it or not, it's like laid out there. And I was a kid when I read it, and it shaped my whole life. I didn't know these. I mean, I just found it in a mimeograph sheet in some lousy little bookstore, and there it was. And I think those people were brilliant. Those women were amazing. And when you fast forward to today and you look at the leadership of all the social justice movements and racial justice organizations, and people like each of you who are leading, and hundreds of others that we can think of and name, and immigrant rights and the movement for Black lives and the New Georgia Project and Mi Gente, in academia, in journalism, in music, in arts and culture. I mean, it's phenomenal, the leadership of women of color and Black women, Black, Indigenous, women of color. I think the last point that Alicia made too on accountability. Oh, before I get there, I just want to say I'm a first generation immigrant, Cecilia. So my country of origin, India, had Indira Gandhi, who was very problematic in ways that Alicia is talking about. Started as a kind of a visionary sort of person and really did horrible, divisive, awful racist things as a leader too. And so, it's not about just, I think that point is so important about representation alone will not save us. We fought a long time for it, and we're still fighting for it in this country. But the accountability that you were talking about, I think, comes from the base that we're building. A base of people, ordinary people, organizers who are coming together and saying, well, these are our values. This is what we want to see. This is how we want to live. This is how we want to be acknowledged and cared for. And somebody said it, an economy based on care.
Yeah.
Beautiful phrase and a powerful aspiration that I think is like the ideology that unites so many of us in this new base. We are a new base, and that base is going to hold the accountability.
That's right.
That makes so much sense because, we also have to remember that it is a huge group of women that think that me and Lala do not belong to their circle, right? It is a huge group of women who call themselves feminists and, my body, my choice, unless I try to sell it to make a coin, right?
Oh, come on.
So, I think that I appreciate that it's not just women in leadership, but also like women who are really gonna look for the well-being and the things that we need as all women.
And Cecilia, what you're touching on speaks to the power of dominant culture and patriarchy, right? Because I think, Lala, you said this, gender is a social construct by those who identify as men, right? And it's to maintain power, right? So you keep rules in place that keep power for you and then make the rest of us fight. Like, oh, this is what a woman is. This is what Black really is. This is what it means to be queer. This is what it means to be brown. This is Latinx. Like all of those labels were put upon us, and it is up to us to try and not just dismantle them, but just like throw it to the side and create the world that we want to see. And I think at the beginning of this conversation, you all really touched on the magic wand work. And I'm hearing you and I'm like taking notes. And in my role at the center as the Chief Advocacy Officer, one of the things I do is oversee a statewide advocacy program, legislation, policy, which are important, but the real crux of that we think is critical is civic engagement and like just offering whatever resources we have to be like, how do you want to create power and what does that look like? And so hearing your answers at the top of this conversation, I am self-interested, I have to admit. If we're looking at New York, right, and we're looking at LGBTQ folks, we're looking at Black, Indigenous, and women of color, and people of color just more broadly, what are some of the local and state policies you want to see pushed? Because something that really has struck me in the last hellish years under the Trump administration is that while there are daily, meaningful, tangible impacts of the destruction of that space, on November 19th of 2020, we're still sitting here, virtual because of poor leadership, but we are actually still sitting here talking about the ways we continue to push and thrive and create spaces for ourselves. So there is progress even under the blanket of oppression. What can we be doing at the local and state level now for folks who look like us and for the next wave who are like, I don't even know which way to go? What would you all suggest as like grounded policies that can be working on?
I am super engaged. I mean, those here who know me know that, I'm all for like, changes and advocacy for the federal government. But, I am really invested in local and state, politics. I think like, local and state politics kind of like offer me this little umbrella. Like, if the federal government is throwing like rock at me, I have an umbrella that is the state and, and the city, So, I am so invested in like leadership in the city and in the state. Is one of my most important priorities at this time. And of course, I always support like the fight for a federal government that represents me. So, I think like we really have to work really hard on defining, what the state and the city is going to look like. And I think we have to redefine, finally redefine what progressiveness look like. I think like we as New Yorkers are very comfortable with using the word progressive, right? And New York City, had a stop and freeze for so many years. New York City and New York State have like, are able to stop and freeze me or anybody under, the loitering laws, right? So I think like we really have to redefine what progressive is, because for a progressive city and a progressive state like New York City and the state of New York, we continue to criminalize ovary like it's no business. We continue to criminalize, people who have to live in a reality where being sent to jail is an everyday feeling, right? And I've been there, as a woman of color, it's like with all the privilege that I have as a light-skinned woman of color, I cannot imagine what it is to be a trans woman like me and also be Black, because that takes you to a whole other level. But the city of New York and the state of New York have to redefine what the progressive ideas are and change the laws that will reflect real and true progressiveness.
And yeah. Add to that, building on that, I mean, I think that the kinds of things that I think about that could comprise a local, really urgent agenda are focus on jobs and workforce development. Our people are really, lots of people are unemployed in our communities, and we got to turn that around. And that's going to require focused funding at the state and city level. We're going to need to expand healthcare access, because a lot of people still don't have it and are losing it because they're unemployed, or because if they had it or they can't afford it. We got to deal with an expansion of reentry programs. We have to, because so many people in our communities, we are overcriminalized. What is that? The Williams Institute was saying our rate of incarceration is 3 times that of the US adult population. This is queer people. And you add, you do a racial justice lens on that, do a race lens on that, a gender lens. There's huge numbers of lesbians and sexual minority women and trans women in jail and prison, disproportionate to our size in the population. There's reasons for that, but that's real. That means on the back end, when people are coming out, you got to have more programming, and not just faith-based programming for reentry. It's got to be programming that people can use. And 2 other things that I would put out: sex work decriminalization has got to be a big agenda item. It's, and then I think, speaking personally as an aging lesbian, I mean, I'm 62. I
Looking
think
good though, looking good.
but we got to deal with that end of life as well as young people. It's like age is like this whole spectrum of services and needs and challenges and experiences and joy. And I think that policy is about people's lives. It should not be abstracted. It builds from what it is and the lived experience and how we want it to be and how we need it to support us. And from that, there's endless possibilities of creativity. Policy is creative. So you did a great job, Shiju.
Yeah, thanks so much, Arvishi. I appreciate that. Alicia or Lala?
Yeah, I mean, I think that all that is great and amazing. I really do, but I also think that because New York is supposed to be so progressive and we have so many people in office and everyone looks to us to model certain things, I think that they missed the mark when we talk about leadership and representation. Like they have all these Democratic clubs that support queer people in office. Majority of them are queer white folks who have access and queer white trans folks and not folks that really represent the community, as well as not taking into account just what it takes for Black trans women in New York to even gain equity in the ways like I always say, like there are ways, even though yes, our lesbian and our gay folks stuff happened to them. I'm not negating that, but there are clear unconsented and just an imbalance on a level playing field. The Black trans woman or a trans woman of color or an undocumented trans person, the playing field is not fair for them. And it's all about, even on the nonprofit level, it's all about shoving HIV and prevention and PrEP down our throats and the over sensationalizing of trans women of color deaths. In which, this year the average age was 34 and the youngest was like 16. And so as you're seeing, the numbers are getting younger. And so before we go on a city and state level, which is amazing, we should be doing those things, but we need to be putting people who are agents of change and not the queer one from the crew that, yay, so-and-so one, but someone who's really for the community, really for the change of this political climate and not just trying to be in there to say I'm the first queer or trans person or this is the first. They love to do that, but you're not in there actually doing anything. You're becoming a product of that system. And actually just really, before we get there, leadership development of Black folks, period. Don't even talk about the trans thing. Add the trans layer to it, just the Black investment in Black leadership and Black equity and pulling Black folks out of homelessness and pulling Black folks out of HIV prevention and drug abuse and all these things. Like those are the systems that they love to push us in and keep us in. Let's go to these systems that are keeping us there, change them and pull us out because those systems are keeping us in there and they're making money off of us. And we're getting lost in the system and no one is coming back to get us. And then it's me who's in the trenches doing that from folks who still wish me dead, wish me harm, and don't feel like I belong even where I'm at right now in this conversation. Mm-hmm. And so just not forgetting that sometimes when you're in this moment, particularly as queer leaders, your sisters are there and we're holding on a lot more than you have to hold on to because you still get to come in the room and get that privilege of being cis, where I'm still trying to prove that I'm good enough, that I belong there, fighting with tokenism, fighting for equal fair pay, fighting for when I show up in my labor being used, people assuming I'm just supposed to do this because this is my job. That's not my job. You get no cookies for doing this work. Mm-hmm. It's what we do as agents of change. Mm-hmm.
I think everyone is pausing to be like, I'm like, today actually there's no disagreement with any of that. Thank you.
Keep going.
All of it.
Yeah. I was thinking about that when we were just having any kind of like this whole month. I've been just thinking about a lot of things with being on pandemic. Just like some people like love working at home, but for a lot of trans folks, them particularly New Yorkers, them able to get up and go to Black Trans Media or go to Trans Latina Network or Destination Tomorrow for the day or the Center. People just take that for granted, but there's people who that's their savior. Them leaving their toxic transphobic bodegas and neighborhoods it's saving them. And then so now we have to find a new way to keep our people's spirits up, keep them motivated, keep them understand that change is going to come, but you're not giving the leaders on the ground the respect that they even deserve or the equity that they even deserve for them to do this work, because we're also taking on emotional labor, and this is our lived experience. And I think folks forget that sometimes. Every day I leave my house or I go over to visit Cecilia or we go somewhere, we know we can lose our life. But we're doing it because we know that we can't live in fear and there's supposed to be something bigger and we're there for our people. But we know every day that that's the reality. The reality is that the police could misgender me or put me, just snatch me up because we have not repealed walking while trans. Or because our sisters are getting snatched up in Jackson Heights, Queens, because we will not repeal Sesta Foster. And so there are things that are happening to us that a lot of folks undercut or just want to bring us in to do checkpoints or data entry for your touch points for your resources.
That's right.
And we're out here hungry too and dying, literally, and praying for a lifeline.
We see no pressure, but that's kind of pressure.
I actually think, you know, that was the perfect period at the end of a very, very important sentence.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. Thank you. You know, we're getting ready to wrap up, but there are things that you all have shared that come back over and over again to the concept of humanity, right? Of seeing each other, of hearing each other's stories, not in that trauma porn, not in the victim porn that sometimes in an employment spaces and you're tokenized and you're like, tell me this story over and over again so that we can show everyone else, you know, you're here and that you exist and you have humanity. I'm not talking about proving your humanity. I'm just talking about seeing each other, right? And I appreciate that because when we see each other, then these issues of the criminalization of poverty, seeing our trans family and affirming them and protecting them and centering their needs, talking about economic advancement and what that looks like. Because if you see someone and you recognize we all need housing, food, water, cute clothes, makeup, whatever you want, right? Like we all need that and a way to access that we have power. So as we wrap up, I want to first thank you all for just letting me fangirl over here. I'm just like listening. Oh my God, I can't believe I'm here in this virtual space with you all and just hearing the stories of how you all do this and show up authentically, because that is what is so powerful about each of your activism. And for folks who are listening, I know that there are folks who are like, I am not any of these 4 people. I'm just sitting at home. My mom doesn't even know I'm out. My cousin said this. I don't have a job, right? But want to contribute. People want to know what's that thing that they can do. And I'm curious if maybe you take like 30 seconds. What's it like a morsel of hope, a call to action, a number to text, a show to watch, whatever it is that you want to leave with folks today, thinking about the breadth of conversation we talked about, the beauty of our lived experiences, challenging each other to do better, to hold ourselves accountable. What would you want to leave with folks this evening?
I want to say like really, really quick, and you know, this is not about me or anything. It's that you know, I'm not trying to define success for anybody, but I'm in a point in my life where I feel like the things that I wanted to succeed, I was able to, and that's a beautiful feeling, right? The feeling that I'm not used to, you know, I never felt like I succeeded in something that I wanted to. So I wanted to say, like, about 10 years ago, I was coming out of immigration detention, fighting a heroin addiction, and I was in treatment. And I applied for an immigration status, and I was in court, and I was in treatment for drug use, and I went to the center, and they gave me an internship, you know, and that was the beginning of all of these. So I ask everybody to support the center because great things come out of there.
Thank you, Cecilia. I'll give you a hug in Ridgewood. That's what, honestly.
I just would say, like, I would charge folks that it starts with yourself. And so I feel like if you don't have a trans friend in your life, you're doing yourself a disservice. If you don't have a disabled friend in your life, you don't have a sex worker in your life, a Black person in your life, this is the world that we live in. And so you don't have issues of saying things pop up or you've never been around it or these things don't exist. Create you a circle of friends that are this Crayola box, which we are, just multitudes of different people, and just charge yourself to be a better human to that person and show up in a way that doesn't mean you want to pry in their life or in a way that's like, I have to do this because I'm supposed to, but actually authentically trying to decolonize your mind and actually be with people there in a humanizing way and understanding in this moment that marginalized people are holding things like we always have a little heavier than most. And so help us take up some of that load off our shoulders and come do some of this work with us so we can go sit on the bench for a little while. We tired. I'm 42 and I've been, blessed.
Looking good.
I've been trans I've been trans all my life, but confirmed at 15. And I feel like I talk to say all the time, like I'm tired. And so I want to be able to just do something else. And I think a lot of us get stuck in nonprofits because we want change so bad, but we're getting older now. Like I just want to have a house and have a farm in the backyard, and I'm good. And Cecilia, and long as Cecilia's my neighbor, when I don't know how to pick something, I can just call her. I'm good. But I think that's what I want. And I think I want that for all leaders, that we pass the baton to go do something else, and that some of our other leaders that have been on the front line so long that we go and say, hey, go and rest. Let me take the baton and let you go live your life. Go travel the world. Go do something else. Like Ms. Major, I would love to see her just be able to do whatever she wants to do and not still have to show up, even though we have to fight these things still, but let her have her life because it will consume you.
Thank you, Alicia.
Okay, well, speaking of Miss Major, if you have it and you can, please support the House of Gigi, which is literally a refuge, a haven, and also a training center for trans women in the South, and not just in the South, child, not just in the South, but like in the South,
Yeah. Definitely.
That would be my call to action.
Thank you so much. And Urvashi, in 30 seconds of fabulousness, what do you
I think that supporting organizations locally where people are that are serving and leading in communities of color is the one thing that I would ask everybody to look at and do. And then personally, what has saved me is action, taking action, and it has that is personally what got me through and gets me through what I'm going through today. Is just trying to find an action I can take with people, and I'm not talking about big glamorous things. Most of the stuff I've done, nobody knows about. It's grassroots organizing with people like each of you. And I think that is the most powerful thing we can do.
Thank you so much. My heart is full. I've been running around like we all have all day and all week, and have been looking forward to this conversation and all the validation and feelings and love. And I have my 2 kids downstairs watching it because I want them to hear and see literally all the times we talk about seeing the power of example. I want them to see this. And so I thank you all for sharing the evening with us.
Thank you.
It has been beautiful. It has been powerful. Folks listening, follow and find these phenomenal people because you will be inspired and guided in all ways, all days. And I'd like to invite Glenda back on as we wrap up tonight's program. Thank you, 3.
Thank you all so much. This was incredible. My heart feels so full. I cried, I laughed, everything I could have hoped for in a women's event, and I'm wearing sweatpants. So this may be the best women's event ever.
Right. That's what happens when women lead, right?
Exactly. My kid's in the next room sleeping. It's just amazing. Thank you all so much. So inspiring. I feel like love and hope and joy is really just so expressed in that panel. I want to give deep appreciation and thank you to everyone supporting the center, to Lala, to Cecilia, to Urvashi, to Alicia, and to Shiju for leading that incredible panel. Thank you all so much. Stay safe out there, and looking forward to hopefully seeing you in person at next year's women's event.
Bye, everyone.